An international station for an international city. This is Radio 3. Money Talk.
Good morning, it's 8:03 in Hong Kong at the start of a new week, Monday the 7th of March. This is Peter Lewis with Money Talk on Radio 3. China has announced a GDP growth target of about 5.5% for 2022 at its annual two sessions. It's the lowest growth target in more than 3 decades. Premier Li Keqiang said despite growth of 8.1% last year, the mainland is facing the triple pressures of shrinking demand, disrupted supply and weakening expectations. The president of the World Bank warned that the war in Ukraine is a catastrophe for the world which will cut global economic growth. Hong Kong's retail sales grew at the slowest pace since July, with the government's warning of further pressure ahead amid a surge in COVID cases. It's 8:24 on the phone now from Shanghai's independent economist Andy Xie. Morning, Andy.
Good morning, Peter.
Let me ask you first of all about this new growth target that was announced at the two sessions on Saturday, 5.5%. That compares to growth of 4% in the fourth quarter last year. Do you think it's achievable?
Well, I think it's going to be hard. On the one side, the Statistics Bureau will likely announce a number similar to what the government said. But in reality, it's going to be very hard. And the economy depends on export, no growth engine at home, and on the and also the property sector is in big trouble. Most developers have liquidity problems this year. They cannot borrow more because of the 3 red lines, and they have debts due, and they don't have the money to pay the debt back. So unless the government changes policy, most developers actually will go bust this year. So I think a lot of uncertainty out there.
So do you think then that China will maybe ease some of these restrictions on the property developers? Will they be forced to do that in the end?
Oh, most developers think the government has to because otherwise the economy will collapse. This is kind of a self-fulfilling expectation that the government is being kept hostage by the property sector. So this kind of a debt Ponzi scheme has been going on. The government is trying to shake it off. So if they loosen the policy, then the Ponzi scheme keeps going. So I think that it's very difficult for the government.
And what about the common prosperity theme? That's really a sort of a major policy plank, isn't it? Does that add to growth or does it subtract from it?
Well, this is actually not correlated with growth. And good growth is usually not very good for social equity. You have surging property prices and boom-bust cycles. These are all very bad for the little people. And only the people in the know, they kind of somehow they come out ahead. So I think that like everywhere else, strong growth, that's what the market wants, what the economists are talking about, is not good for little people.
And are they going to fall back on their traditional ways of trying to, stimulate the economy through manufacturing? Are they going to have to turn away from trying to do things like increase domestic spending?
Well, they could push infrastructure again, but I think infrastructure is kind of in surplus situation in most areas. And also local governments are so much in debt and they have revenue problem because they don't sell land like before. And the local governments depend on land sales for half of their revenues. So I think that the domestic side doesn't look like there's an easy go-to place. So it all depends on export.
So that's what I was going to ask. If they can't rely on infrastructure investment anymore and property investments, what do they rely on to boost growth? You're saying it's exports.
Yeah, last year, exports rose by 30% on very high base, increased by $700 billion. But this year, obviously, it's going to be lots less.
It's very risky, isn't it, given the external environment at the moment?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the world may be headed for a recession because of the Ukraine crisis. And the energy shock is maybe just the beginning.
So what is the impact of the Ukraine crisis on China directly?
Directly, actually, is probably going to be limited because Russia will sell a lot of oil and gas to China and also grain, I suppose. But Russia is a small market. It's even though they probably Russians can't buy iPhones, so they'll have to do with Xiaomi. So the consumer goods, Russians, like in 2014, they ate vegetables from Western Europe. Then they started eating local vegetables, pretty kind of chewy stuff, but they switched. I think this time they'll switch to Chinese consumer goods. They live like Chinese. But the big issue is the global demand. The Russians cannot buy so much. If there's a global recession, then it looks very difficult for China.
Even if China, which is a big importer, we know, of agricultural products, of energy products, even if it can buy more from Russia, it's got to pay much higher prices for it, hasn't it? So what sort of impact is that going to have on consumer price inflation on the mainland?
Yeah, they raise prices usually like in the last 20 years. But this time, I think it's different. I think that the government may hold down the prices. So the people who buy Chinese oil stocks because of the oil prices rising, they may be disappointed because now politics is so much more important than before.
Andy, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Shanghai-based independent economist Andy Xie.
You're listening to Money Talk on RTHK Radio 3.